It's so wonderful to have you here, Drew. Drew Catt is Director of State Research and Special Projects at EdChoice. EdChoice was originally the Friedman Foundation, founded by Milton Rose and Rose Friedman. Milton, of course, was arguably the most famous and influential economist of the 20th century. And of all of his great achievements, he believes school choice was the most important um, initiative he had, which is why the foundation was originally named in his honor. And Drew is a specialist in the private school choice. This is my generalization. Maybe you can give a better version, but I think it's the most important thing. So we have the person who specializes in the most important thing at the most important organization, giving us an overview of private educational choice. And I'll just do a little bit of the standard bio. Drew graduated from Vanderbilt in 2008 with a bachelor's degree in human and organizational development, while specializing in leadership and organizational effectiveness. While at Vanderbilt, Drew served as assistant for North Star Destination Strategies, a community branding organization. He also researched the effects of homeschooling on socialization. He then received his Master's of Public Affairs in Nonprofit Management at Indiana University School of Public and Environmental Affairs in Indianapolis, and received his Master of Arts in Philanthropic Studies through the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. While in graduate school, Drew's research focused on teacher performance initiatives and cross-sector collaboration. He recently received a graduate certificate in Geographic Information Science from IUPUI. And he's a native of Central Indiana and resides downtown in Indianapolis with wife Elizabeth and their sons. But going back to the headline, the most important specialist at the most important organization from my perspective. So take it away, Drew.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you see me jerk my head upwards, it is because my almost 4-year-old has gotten out of bed when he shouldn't. So yeah, thank you so much for attending this session. Thanks for putting your time and energy towards this. I know it's a little late in the evening, so I will try to keep my high energy. So again, my name is Drew Catt. I am, as soon as I get the screen share up, I am the Director of State Research and Special Projects at EdChoice. And in that role, I conduct a lot of surveys of private school leaders, of school parents, help conduct voter polls, and also really analyze private school choice programs. So when we talk about private educational choice, what are we really talking about? Well, we kind of break everything down into 5 separate program types. Education savings accounts, or ESAs, vouchers, tax credit ESAs, tax credit scholarships, and some states have individual tax credits and deductions. And so first off, what is an ESA? ESAs allow parents to withdraw their children from a public district school or charter schools and receive a deposit of public funds into government authorized savings accounts with restricted but multiple uses. And when I say multiple uses, those funds can cover private school tuition and fees, online learning programs, private tutoring, community college costs, higher education expenses, and even other approved customized learning services and materials. And some ESAs, but not all, even allow students to use their funds to pay for a combination of public school courses and private services. The next is vouchers. This was Milton Friedman's original school choice idea back in 1955. And if you saw Miss Virginia Walden Ford talk earlier today, this evening, the DC voucher program is a voucher program. So vouchers give parents the freedom to choose a private school for their children using all or part of the public funding set aside for their education. Under such a program, funds typically expended by a district would be allocated to a participating family in the form of a voucher to pay partial or full tuition for the child's private school, including both religious and non-religious options. Tax credit ESAs are the newest program type just in the last year or two. So tax credit ESAs, they function just like an ESA, but the funding mechanism is slightly different. So they allow taxpayers to receive full or partial tax credits when they donate to nonprofit organizations that fund and manage parent-directed K-12 ESAs. And then in terms of the usage, it's very similar and almost identical to typical ESAs. Tax credit scholarships, just like tax credit ESAs, function like ESAs for the family, which parents and students as the end user, there's no technical differentiation. It's just the funding mechanism. So tax credit scholarships are similar to vouchers and how they function, just funds for brick and mortar private schools. However, tax credit scholarships, like tax credit ESAs, do have that pass-through entity of the nonprofit where the donation is exchanged for a tax credit. And yeah, individual tax credit deductions, there are about 9 states that have them, but they are very, very small, limited programs, usually typically between $100 and $250 on the tax return. So that's the overview of private educational choice. But I'm really here to talk about who has it, who wants it, and what the data shows. So first, let's dive into who has it. So we put forth our flagship publication, the ABCs of School Choice, every January. So I'm going to share some data that we've collected for the 2022 edition that recently came out. So when you look at the programs over time, we have some old programs from the 18 and early to mid 1900s, but really 1990 was the start of the modern school choice era with the Milwaukee and Cleveland voucher programs. You can really see there's been exponential growth, especially in the last decade, but even from 2001 to 2011-12, and especially from 2011-12 to 2021-22. And you can see in 2021, that's when the tax credit ESAs came into existence, with 2012 with the ESAs coming into existence in the state of Arizona. So that's the number of programs that there are, but where do they really exist? So only Florida, Indiana, and New Hampshire have vouchers, tax credit scholarships, and ESAs. There are only 2 states that have tax credit ESAs, and that's Missouri and Kentucky. But really, so it's mostly Florida, Indiana, New Hampshire that have the most variety in terms of the types of private school choice programs. In total, there are 76 programs on the books in 32 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. So there are 8 ESA programs spread across 8 different states. There are 29 voucher programs across 16 states, DC and Puerto Rico. The 2 tax credit ESA programs in Kentucky and Missouri, like I showed a slide ago. And then there are 26 tax credit scholarship programs in 21 different states. And Arizona has the most tax credit scholarship programs of any state. Other than that, the majority of states only have 1. So that's the number of programs, the types of programs, where the programs exist. This is a slide that I love updating and showing as it grows and grows and grows. So yeah, since I started in my role back in 2013, the number of students receiving a voucher or an ESA and the number of tax credit scholarships has more than doubled. So there are a total of, as far as we know, and based on the data that we have collected from state departments of education and state departments of revenue, there are over 660,000 students participating in these programs across America. And that's as of April 1st. So we will, hopefully this number jumps even more once we get the end of school year data from a multitude of the states. So what does this really mean in the full context of choice and what choices are available and school types and schooling environments for parents? So I came up a handful of years ago with something that I really called like the educational choice share, really EdChoice share, where we really split out the proportion of K-12 students by schooling environments. So as a nation, the United States, about 1.1% of students, K-12 students in the US, are receiving a voucher, tax credit scholarship, or ESA to attend private school. With the caveat that there are many ESA students that don't actually step foot in a brick and mortar public school. A lot of the ESA programs are tailored to students with special needs, and a lot of them students with the highest level of needs. So some of these students, they're best tutored at home or have in-home learning experiences. When we look at other private school shares, this is basically students attending a private school without one of these programs. It's about 7% as a nation. And then a little more than 4 out of 5 students still attend a public district school, which does include magnet schools. Almost 7% are now in a charter school. And based on most recent estimates, which are a little lagging, about 3% are in homeschool. Now, based on what we've seen from the pandemic, I will say that the homeschool data is from 2019. The hard part working with education data is you're usually working with a 2 to 3 year lag, because this state has to collect it from the districts, and then the federal government collects it from the states, and then they have to clean it and organize it, and then before they disseminate it. But in terms of total EdChoice share, which again is vouchers, tax credit, scholarships, and ESAs in this instance, Arizona definitely leads the pack in terms of percentage of K-12 students participating in one of these programs, with Florida close behind in second, with about 1 in 20, a little more than 1 in 20 students in Florida and Wisconsin utilizing one of the programs, which is just amazing, because when I started doing these calculations, there wasn't really any state over 4%. So it really is great to see these numbers grow and grow and grow every single year. So that's who has it. Let's really move on to who wants it. So again, our website has a wealth of information. The map that I just showed in an interactive format, and you can click through all the various program types, which I'll showcase a little bit at the end. But who wants it? Really, here I'm going to dive into some of the polling data that we do, both on a national level on an annual basis, and at a national and state level on a monthly basis. So what you see in front of you is from our most recent national poll that we conducted back in this summer. So the question that we ask is, if it was your decision, what type of school would you choose for your child to attend? The general population, this is any adult 18 and up, is pretty much even with all current school parents, which this would be any parent who has a child in K through 12, with about 2 in 5 saying public district school, which, if you remember, as a nation, the percentage in a public district school is double that. It's more than 4 out of 5, when really slightly less than 2 out of 5 would prefer that if it was their choice. And as you can all see, time and time again, the actual enrollment patterns, again, these 2019 enrollments that was most available at the time, do not reflect the diversity of parents' schooling preferences. And we also do a split sample experiment. This is kind of the combination of the results, which I'll show the wording here on this next slide. And this is from our monthly poll. So this is from March 2022. And the main difference between the surveys, to kind of get a touch into the weeds, is the national survey that we do. We both have online panelists that respond, and we actually contract out with a call center that makes physical telephone calls, where on a monthly basis, this is just online respondents. So the numbers are a little slightly different. But the question is, if given the option, and again, the expansive version has the added phrase, and neither financial costs nor transportation were factors, what type of school would you select in order to obtain the best education for your child? And it's really striking that it's less than half of the actual regular public school attendance is proportionally what parents would choose if they had the option. And it really is kind of eye-opening thinking about the percent of parents that would choose to homeschool if cost was not a factor. Personally, like, I was homeschooled for 1st through 5th grade. I saw the pains my parents went through, and grew up on a low-income farm, and that they scrimped and saved in order to pay for that homeschool curriculum. And don't get me wrong, I'm extremely grateful for that. And I just wonder how many other families were kind of just on the cusp of something similar, and they just didn't have the finances in order to make that happen for their child. then when we look at favorability of these various types of choice reforms, the last 3 years, we have seen record favorability across all program types. And there are a lot of firms that conduct and organizations that conduct polls. We all had what we kind of, for lack of a better phrase, described as a COVID bump in 2020, where everyone was much more optimistic and favorable about kind of non-traditional forms of education. But still, it's the fact that a lot of these numbers are slightly higher or in line with 2019 just shows the demand is growing. The demand is there. Parents are extremely favorable about these types of programs, especially when they become informed. And what we are seeing within the year, which we are able to track through our monthly poll, is that there's actually not a lot of variation. Favorability is fairly consistent across months. So this isn't just something that spikes in the summer months or right as back to school starts or right as the school year is ending, like can happen with other types of education reforms. But really, there is that consistent favorability of, in terms of parents, 3 out of 4 parents almost consistently, month in, month out, strongly support or somewhat support ESAs. And then we also like to split out kind of types of ESAs, because there are a lot of different ones out there. Some of these programs can be limited, and private educational choice programs across the board can be limited based on income level. Some of them are tailored specifically to students with special needs. Ohio has a voucher program that only students diagnosed with autism can participate. But when we actually ask the question, and this is one that we've been able to track over time, that Americans are much more favorable of universal ESAs. That is, they believe that every child should be able to have access, rather than access be limited to those with a certain income, underneath a certain income level, or with a certain special needs diagnoses. And the fact that more than 3/4 of the public support universal access to ESAs is just astounding. And for the work that we do is very promising and hopeful. All right, so I'm a self-described nerd. I work in the corner of our office that we affectionately call the nerdery. So I'm going to get into some numbers here. Going to try to keep it fairly high level. So these are the number of studies of private school choice programs by location. As you can see, there are a few that have been nationwide, and personally knowing, and now I'm informing you that because Wisconsin and Ohio and Arizona and Florida have the oldest programs, turns out they're the most studied, because the longer that a program has been in effect, the more that you can do amazing things like look at students who started the program in kindergarten and whether or not they graduated high school, whether or not they attended college, whether or not they graduated from college. And this is based on a publication that we just updated and released earlier this week. But as of March 2022, there have been 175 different studies of private educational choice. And as you can see, there's really been a jump in the last couple of years. We like to break these programs out really by outcome types, and I'll go a little descriptive about what each one is. So when we talk about program participant test scores, these studies examine whether students who receive and or use a voucher or a scholarship to attend a private school of their choice achieve higher test scores than students who applied for but did not receive or use scholarships. Typically, those are through a lottery. Those are all through a lottery system, so that way researchers can say, "Oh, you both applied and you were both eligible, but one of you, quote, quote, won the lottery while one did not." And of those 17 random assignment studies, which is the gold standard for research, it's what medical research uses. So of the 17 that were conducted, 11 found positive outcomes for either the full sample or at least one subsample of the students studied, such as Hispanic females or Black males. 4 found no visible effect for any groups of students, and 3 found negative outcomes for all or some students. I would caveat that 2 of the studies of the Louisiana voucher program were negative for all students, and 1 study of the Milwaukee voucher program had mixed results. That's positive for some students and negative for some students. And if you're interested in why Louisiana was negative, more than happy to talk about that and why programs shouldn't necessarily mandate the state test, but a national test. We also go into educational attainment. There are fewer of these because, as I was saying earlier, it's really the older programs that this is able to be studied. So these are studies of the likelihood to graduate high school, whether the program has an impact on enrolling in college or attaining a college degree. And of the 7 studies that we have so far, 5 have found positive effects and 2 found no visible effects. Parent satisfaction, somewhat self-explanatory. The studies rely on polling and surveys to measure the extent to which parents with children participating in these programs are satisfied with the current school compared to the school that their child was attending before the program, or to students in other sectors. Of the 32 studies that have examined school choice's impact on parent satisfaction, 30 found positive impact outcomes, 1 was null, and 2 found overall negative outcomes. And everything in those second 2 columns was my Arizona study, which found mixed results, some positive outcomes, some negative for others for the ESA program, and mixed results for the tax credit scholarship programs. For those of you not familiar with the Arizona charter sector, the charter sector in Arizona is amazing and outshone across all levels of parent satisfaction compared to the ESA or tax credit scholarship programs. We also look at, there are also researchers who look at public school students' test scores. Basically, when students leave a public school, do the students who stay worsen? Do their test scores decrease? And overall, overwhelmingly, 25 of the 28 studies found positive effects. 1 was no visible effect, and 2 found negative effects. One of those was for the Florida A+ program, which no longer allows for private school enrollment. So this was in the early years of that program. Civic values and practices is a really interesting one, especially with my background in philanthropic studies. So this is more on the tolerance for the rights of others, civic knowledge, a decrease in engaging in criminal activity, increase in civic participation, increase in volunteerism, social capital, civic skills, voter registration, voter turnout, and patriotism. And overwhelmingly, these are either positive or there's no visible effect. Integration is really tricky in how it's studied, whether or not the sending school has better quote unquote better integration, or the sending school does. But really, these examine the effect on racial and ethnic diversities, and overwhelmingly positive. Then when we're talking fiscal effects, this is just whether programs generate net savings, net costs, or are cost neutral for taxpayers. And overwhelmingly, these programs the research on these finds that these programs save money. So I realize that I'm short on time, but I would love to walk everyone briefly through one section of our website. So if you go to edchoice.org and then go to the school choice tab, find your state, Florida, and this is for any state. So for every single state, it kind of has the list of the types of programs. You can click through for a description of each one. And also there's this wonderful fast facts tab. And this actually has charts from every single piece of research that we've done in the state. So everything from schooling preferences specific to that state, where students attend school now, the reasons parents choose from a parent survey, this is from a private school survey. And if you actually click on the link for the first one, this goes to the state page for our monthly tracker that we do, where you can see the results for some of those exact same questions that we're showing. So you can see in Florida specifically, what do residents think of ESAs or school vouchers or charter schools? What do Florida residents and parents think about the direction of education in their states? With that, I realize that I'm on time, so I will stop and take any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Drew. That was great. Does anybody have any questions for Drew? I have a quick one. I'm interested in non-academic outcomes. And I know you do the civic engagement and so forth, but what are the new directions coming in terms of looking at non-academic outcomes? Is that sort of a domain you're beginning to look at?
Yeah, so that one is really, really fascinating. I mean, if in my ideal world, if I had access to all of the data and was able to track students over time with a panel, the thing that I personally would want to study is happiness and whether or not, because to me that is the ultimate goal of anything in improving life is happiness, overall life outcomes. You know, happiness is very squishy and can be defined a lot of different ways, but really, yeah, our overall, do these programs, we know that across the board they improve civic engagement, volunteering, community service, patriotism, civic knowledge, religious tolerance. But yeah, my hypothesis is that they produce more happy individuals as well. But yeah, that's something that I personally would love to study, just the lack of data availability.
Well, I would be happy to help raise money for that. So if you guys create a proposal and need some money, I'm super passionate. I think you're spot on. That's the biggest thing. So let's make it happen. Um, and then Michelle asks how long Drew has done this.
Yeah, so yeah, in a week, or actually 2 weeks from now, will be my 9-year mark with EdChoice.
So the expert. Laura asks, what were your conclusions in your research on homeschooling and socialization?
Yeah, so again, like I had a little bias going in, being homeschooled for a handful of years myself, and two of my best friends being homeschooled longer than I was. The research at the time, which I haven't kept up with it, so that's why I'm going to specify the research at the time, was that homeschooling actually increased socialization. Homeschoolers were more likely than their peers to be able to feel comfortable in a conversation with an adult that they didn't know, feel more comfortable conversing, and have a higher level of social skills with people outside of their own age.
Terrific. And Chris asks, and you won't have time to go too deeply into this, what would your happiness index look like? Factors and weightings.
Yeah, that's one that I am definitely not an expert, and I would want to pull in psychometricians and educational psychologists and psychologists in general to really help flesh that out and what that would mean. Hopefully, and assumably it would be mostly surveys, but really tracking over time and having a really solid comparison group as well.
Well, it looks like that's it on the questions, but I've actually been, I think that especially on happiness, and I would also say mental health. I think that a lot of anxiety and depression is much worse in schools than when children have alternatives that are more appropriate for them. So in addition to a happiness index, I'd love to see data on anxiety and depression. And I know some people have also looked into suicide, and it's very complicated. But I think we need to look at a lot of mental health fundamentals as well as happiness.
Yeah, and so in our national poll in 2020, and for serendipitous, for lack of a better word, it was a double-edged sword, in that we started our monthly tracker project in January 2020. So we were able to ask a lot of questions around the onset of COVID and throughout the national pandemic. And some of the questions that we were asking, especially in our national poll, did focus on emotional well-being and social well-being of students, and looking at differences across sectors, which was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, 26 seconds. Thank you for joining us, Drew. It was really valuable to have you. And I encourage everybody, I go to the EdChoice website probably once a month. It is the headquarters for all school choice data. And yeah, check it out. Lots of cool stuff there. All right. Thanks, Drew. Thanks, everybody. I'll see you over in the closing session. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.